Union Pacific's Cascade Subdivision in western Oregon features a 45-mile mountain grade of 1.8%. In days of old, helpers based at the bottom of the hill at Oakridge were used to assist heavy trains to Cascade Summit. As technology advanced, manned helpers were replaced with remote-controlled helpers, known as DPUs, or Distributed Power Units. They were placed as needed throughout the train to assist the lead engines. But for a few years, between late 2018 and 2023, manned helpers returned to Oakridge as in the days of the Southern Pacific. We filmed the Oakridge helpers in April and May of 2022, and here is our account. We began along the shore of Lookout Reservoir, where UP 7227 leads a manifest train toward the helper base of Oakridge. The 3 GEs powering this train have had an easy time so far, negotiating the foothills of the Cascade Mountain Range on a grade that occasionally reached 1%. But above Oakridge, it'll nearly double and the curves will tighten. This southbound manifest train is symboled the MPDRVB. It originated in Portland, Oregon, and is bound for Roseville, California. The B designation indicates that this is the second of 2 MPDRV trains which departed Portland on the same day. Along with tanks and covered hoppers, loads of lumber from the Pacific Northwest are California bound. The loaded center beam cars on the rear of the train will give the helpers something heavy to lean on once the heavy grade begins. The middle fork of the Willamette River guides the railroad to the base of the Cascade Mountains at Oakridge. Eventually, this water will reach the mighty Columbia River at Portland and empty into the Pacific Ocean near Astoria. First explored in 1852 by pioneers as a possible route from central Oregon into the Willamette Valley, the town of Oakridge went by a few different names in its early years. A post office in 1888 used the name Hazeldell. Later it was called Big Prairie. The Oakridge name officially came to be in 1912 as the community grew thanks to the arrival of the Southern Pacific. When the Natron cutoff was completed between Eugene and Klamath Falls in 1926, Oakridge became an important helper base at the bottom of the grade to Cascade Summit. It also served as a maintenance of way base for the west side of the mountains. Amtrak's Coast Starlight passes through Oakridge, but does not stop. This is Amtrak 11, running south between Seattle and Los Angeles. In 2001, manned helpers out of Oakridge gave way to remote-controlled diesels in the form of GE C40-8s and the brand new 5700 series of C40-9AC CTEs. These units were added to southbound trains in Eugene and would remain as far as Klamath Falls. There, they would be added to northbound trains and return to Eugene. Sometimes UP ran them north as light power with the symbol EKFEU. This wasn't the end of the manned helpers, though. Trouble with radio communication between the head-end power and rear DPUs through the numerous tunnels forced UP to bring back manned helpers for a short period of time. The communication problem was resolved, and distributed power was back. And it looked to be for good. Trains with distributed power eventually began running all the way to Roseville, California, around 400 miles to the south, providing additional dynamic braking on the steep 2.2% downhill run to Dunsmuir in the Sacramento River Canyon in Northern California. But the Cascade Subdivision had not seen the last of the manned helpers. In late 2018, the decision was made to eliminate DPUs on most southbound trains heading to California. 2 helper sets were stationed in Oakridge and operated by qualified crews out of Eugene. Each crew would get 2 shoves during their shift. Reminiscent of the SP years, Oakridge was again a helper base. If a unit train with rear DPUs needed a shove, the helpers were added mid-train. This is Tunnel 22. At just under 2,000 feet in length, it separates Oakridge from the nearby town of Westford. The lights you see are a 3-unit helper set heading northbound. They will meet a waiting grain train at Lookout, the next siding to the north. UP 2577 holds the main just short of the grade crossing at Lookout, while the helpers have ducked into the siding well out of view around the curve. The Canadian Pacific units give us a hint to this train's origin. It is symboled the GMETPX. The UP picked it up at the Canadian border at Eastport, Idaho, and it is bound for a feed mill in Pixley, California. The engineer slowly backs the power to provide slack for the cut, which will be made near the north end of the siding. With the cut made, the head-end power pull the first half of the train ahead several car lengths, so the helpers can slide in. Trains needing mid-train helpers stop here rather than Oakridge to avoid tying up the crossing in town. The helper crew also doesn't have to tie as many handbrakes on the rear of the train since the grade is lesser here. This train weighs in at 14,291 tons. While the first half of the train waits, the helpers back out of the siding onto the second half. The switch is thrown for the main, the handbrakes are released, and the helpers pull forward to couple onto the rear of the first half. After completing an air test, the lead engineer gives the helper engineer the OK, and the grain train slowly gets underway. Normally, a 4-unit helper set is used on these heavy unit trains. However, one of the Oakridge helpers was out of commission, leaving 3 to do the work. To compensate, UP added a second DPU to the rear of this train at Eugene. CP 8142 and UP 7418 add their combined tractive effort to the rear of the grain train. We'll catch up with this train a little farther up the hill. But first, let's return to Oakridge. This is April of 2022, and a helper set glides into town after assisting a southbound to the snowy apex of Cascade Summit, 45 miles away and 3,700 feet higher than the treetops here in Oakridge. Their next assignment will be the UP 6399, which will be arriving shortly. The southbound slowly approaches on the main and holds short of the signals at control point CPVP 580. We can tell by the red over yellow the dispatcher has a northbound line into the siding. UP 8099 leads train MRVEU, a Roseville to Eugene manifest, into town. It'll run around the 6399, which is in between switches on the main. With the MRVEU clear, the 6399 gets a light to proceed southward. This is another MPDRV out of Albina Yard in Portland. The newly rebuilt GE C44 ACM really looks sharp on this cloudy spring day. With the rear of the MPDRV clear of the crossing, helpers 7931 and 7942 come out of the yard to tie onto the rear of the train. The signal is given, and the helpers begin their shove as the mountain grade begins shortly after leaving town. The Cascade Subdivision leaves the middle fork of the Willamette River for a short fling with Salmon Creek, which it wraps around on an impressive horseshoe. This looks more like a river than a creek, with spring runoff swelling its banks. The thundering water can make it hard to hear anything approaching on the rails. So, while enjoying the scene, it's a good idea to stay vigilant. From a higher perspective, UP 7070 South slowly crosses the Salmon Creek Bridge as the train pauses to add helpers. From our viewpoint, this is a nice scene, and one that cannot be appreciated at track level. With the helpers leaning on the rear drawbar, the 7070 slowly resumes its uphill climb. Although mostly hidden from view, the railroad passes the Oakridge fish hatchery as it snakes its way out of town. Later that day, we opted for a lower angle as the helpers returned down the hill. The railroad climbs through the Willamette National Forest following the course of Salt Creek. The granite face of Baby Rock peers down from its perch in the timber above the siding of Pryor. Both helper sets ease down grade as one light power move. One set will get to rest at Oakridge. The other has work to do. That work is the UP 2586 South, with another manifest for California. Helpers 7939 and 2608 make another trip to Cascade Summit behind the sweet-smelling loads of fresh-cut lumber. According to that milepost stuck in the bank, we have made it 9 miles up the hill from Oakridge. SD78's number 8629 leads an MPW RV through the Oregon Cascades. The PW tells us this train was handed off to Uncle Pete by the Portland and Western Railroad at Eugene. Helpers 7931 and 7942 are again seen digging in on the 1.8% grade. With helpers, what goes up must come back down again, and through the crossing of Whiskey Butte Road. The Cascade Mountains draw a distinct line between western and eastern Oregon. The west side takes the brunt of moisture coming off the Pacific Ocean, while the east side lives in a rain shadow with pine, juniper, and sagebrush. Another helper set consisting of Tier 4 GEVO 2608 and C-44 ACM number 6664 glides back to the helper base at Oakridge. The higher we climb, the colder the rain. This is the north switch of the siding of McCreaty Springs. A warm headlight of UP 2577 takes away some of the chill as our grain train with the Canadian Pacific Power and swing helpers approach. Although we couldn't see it, a northbound train was waiting in the siding. Within a couple of minutes, the switch at North McCreaty Springs was reversed, siding to main, and UP 7464 approached our location on the point of the MRVHK. This is a mixed manifest train bound for UP's Hinkle Yard in Northeast Oregon. The Cascade Subdivision may be single-track with sidings, but a well-timed meet at McCreaty Springs can make it seem like a double-track railroad. We are witnessing one such meet. UP 8246 heads northbound through the siding with a Roseville to Hinkle manifest. The train meets the MPDRV we saw in Oakridge taking on helpers, led by the UP 6399. It is a dark, cold, and rainy afternoon at McCreaty Springs. That white stuff near the tracks is a slight hint of what's in store for us by the time we reach Fields. The 7942 and 7931 return light to Oakridge with a hello from the engineer. A military train is waiting at Oakridge for a shove, and in less than an hour, UP 8718 stomps up the grade at a good clip. Although this train appears to have plenty of power, including one DPU on the rear, one of its lead units suffered an engine failure and therefore required helpers. We have found the snow zone at Heather as the helpers drift back to Oakridge to clear up for tonight's Amtrak 11. We are at the 2,000-foot level, where a spring mixture of snow and rain has created a dreamy setting for trains to run through. In the distance, we can see the dispatcher has hung a green on the main track for the southbound Coast Starlight. The following evening, we find ourselves at the south switch of Heather, and again a clear signal shines for Amtrak 11. Tonight's train is led by another aging GE P42 number 79. a rare B-32-8 number 510, and P-42 number 38. Returning to Heather in May, the scene has changed completely as a helper set rolls over the Salt Creek Trestle on a warm spring afternoon. Earlier that day, we caught the UP 9018 leading a Portland to Roseville train over the trestle. Pitched on a 1.8% grade, the trestle leads the railroad over Salt Creek and Highway 58. After crossing Salt Creek, the railroad winds toward the siding of Wikipedi. Amtrak 14 drifts out of Tunnel 20 on its mid-morning journey through the Cascades. The Starlight is immediately followed by another helper set. The saying, "You can't see the forest for the trees," is definitely true of the Cascade Subdivision. The main line is just a narrow corridor through the forest of Douglas fir. Near the south end of Tunnel 20 is the north switch of Wikipedi, a 5,401-foot siding between Heather and Fields. Not very long by today's standards. Dispatcher 68 in Omaha has lined a Portland to Los Angeles intermodal train through here, led by UP 7819. Note the notch in the tunnel to accommodate double stacks. This was done in the mid-2000s as intermodal traffic grew on the I-5 corridor. This train is the IBRLC. It originated at Brooklyn Yard in Portland and is bound for Los Angeles. This is another example of the few trains that still use DPUs on the Cascade Subdivision. AC 4460CW number 7060 assists this 9,000-foot train, 2/3 back of the head-end power. On a beautiful spring morning, Helper 7527 and 8031 glide through Wikipedi. Wikipedi rests on the flank of Beach Mountain, below the former siding of Fraser. Bunchgrass Ridge rises its big shoulders to the north on the far side of the Salt Creek Canyon. Although you cannot see it, the main line is both below us and above us, and trains can be heard for a long time before they ever pass through Wikipedi. That was the case for the UP 7942 South, as it grinds up grade. The two UP units leading a pair of Norfolk Southern engines makes us wonder about the future of these two railroads, with the talk of a merger in the works in 2025. The massive clearing at Wikipedi dates back to the 2008 Fraser slide, which wiped out the main line. Excess mud and debris was dumped here during the line's reconstruction, which took 3 months to complete. As the rear engines approach, we can definitely tell they are not DPUs. At least, we have never heard radio-controlled engines acknowledge rail fans before. As the helpers roll through the south switch, the train continues through tunnels 19, 18, and 17 to a place Southern Pacific called the Slide. Located just below the siding of Fields, the ground was found to be unstable, prompting Southern Pacific to establish a permanent speed restriction at this site. UP has since made improvements to the grade, and trains now march straight through to Fields. This is not to be confused with the 2008 slide at Fraser, which was much more catastrophic in nature. We catch our grain train with mid-train helpers one more time as it curves through the slide. You can still find evidence of the unstable ground at the slide by looking at the old leaning trees where the earth has moved beneath their feet for decades. Set against the massive cliffs of Bunchgrass Ridge, the leaning trees make a good backdrop for photographing trains at the slide. We had to catch that clean UP 6399 one more time as it climbs toward Fields. This is tunnel country, and that paint won't stay fresh for long. The helpers shoved the rear of the train into Tunnel 16, just out of view. Fields is located just above us, and the rumble of the train echoes through the timber. On a warmer day, we scrambled to the top of Tunnel 16 as another light helper set heads down the mountain. Tunnel 16 is set on a horseshoe curve. It is 2,213 feet in length and currently occupied by UP 2586 South. The helpers disappear from view, crossing over the north switch of Fields. In snow country such as this, it is common to find large propane tanks at each end of the siding. They provide fuel for the switch heaters that are used to keep the switch points free of ice and snow. They are operated by the train dispatcher during the winter months. Fields is an 8,590-foot siding located between tunnels 16 and 15. It features a Y and house track in addition to the siding. A pair of bad order cars rest in the house track. There is a wheel impact detector located just down the hill, and we suspect that may be why these cars were set out here. We are now 25 miles above Oakridge and 2,000 feet higher in elevation. The cold rain we found at McCreaty Springs has turned to snow as UP 8718 continues its climb toward Cascade Summit with its military train. With an elevation of 3,300 feet, Fields is traditionally the start of the snow zone. The wooden marker measures up to 12 feet, but this is April, and there's just enough snow to make it look wintry. Willamette Pass averages about 430 inches of snow annually, with the heaviest snowfall between January and March. UP 4364 is northbound as it drops down through Fields. On a cool spring morning, while Oakridge is socked in with fog and drizzle, it is clear and sunny at Fields. While waiting for a southbound IBRLC, helpers 2608 and 6664 drift down grade with a friendly greeting from the engineer. The helpers met the intermodal train at Wikipedi. It is powered by 3 GEs on the point. No DPUs this time. Departing Fields, we move higher up the mountain to Cruis. Like Fields, this siding is jammed in between two tunnels. It has a length of just 4,820 feet. UP 9018 stomps up the mountain with an MPDRV. Helpers 8031 and 7527 assist this train up the grade, which tops out at 1.87% here at Cruis. A Great All Trackstar machine sits near Tunnel 5. Spring has come to the Cascades, and there is always ditching work to be done, cleaning up small rock slides and the like. While our last train continued toward Cascade Summit, it met the other helper set at Abernathy. This clear signal tells us they're getting close. It's the 20th day of April 2022, and we are at Cascade Summit. The elevation is around 4,800 feet, and there is just under 7 feet of snow on the ground, according to that big wooden depth gauge. We couldn't tell you what the blue light is for, but we're sure it doesn't mean there's a sale on at Kmart. Finishing the 43-mile climb from Oakridge, UP 8629 lugs the MPWRV to the top of the grade at Cascade Summit. With their shove complete, helpers 7931 and 7942 prepare to cut off their train after coming to a stop. Before they can reverse direction and start back down the hill, the helpers must wait for Amtrak 14, the northbound Coast Starlight. With a high ball and a wave to the helper crew, AMTK 160, wearing the 50th anniversary Pepsi can heritage paint scheme, leads the Starlight down the west side of the Cascades. This chapter in the history of helpers in the Oregon Cascades would continue for another year. As train lengths increased, it was no longer feasible to place manned helpers on the rear. Rather than cutting helpers into the middle of each train to make the hill, Union Pacific decided to bring back distributed power. Helper operations ceased in Oakridge in December of 2023. For now, anyway. Who knows what the future will bring? But in the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed this look at helpers working in the Oregon Cascades. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.